at the constitutional imperatives for procurement. Because I believe if we look at procurement as being broader into our asset management, into our budgeting and planning, it's the same principles that apply. So if we look at this, if I paraphrased what the Constitution requires, because when you look at the Constitution, all of us jump to section 217 and say the system must be fair, equitable, transparent, competitive, cost effective, and we say it must provide for a preferential procurement policy and we need legislation to do it. And we stop there. Now, the Constitutional Court ruled a number of years ago that said the tendering system that is devised must be fair, equitable, transparent, competitive, and cost effective. Great, we understand that. This requirement must be understood together with the constitutional prescripts on administrative justice and the basic values governing public administration. Okay. Now, if you started looking at that and rolled things together, you get a different picture. Plus the fact is that when you read the Constitution, the procurement system is all about goods and services when contracting for goods and services. So it's a whole contracting system. And it's what are the processes upstream, downstream, and as I said to you, my view on procurement is the process which creates, manages, and fulfills contracts, and that is going to include the whole demand management. Everything that Treasury's got now in the Public Procurement Act really is embracing that. Now let's just unpack this and put it all together. So if I paraphrase the constitutional requirements, it says the system for contracting of goods and services must be fair, equitable, transparent, competitive, and cost-effective, and embrace a procurement policy providing for categories of preference in the allocation of contracts and the protection or advancement of persons or categories of persons disadvantaged by unfair discrimination. That's our 217. But then if we look at 195, and 195 says, it must also promote the efficient, effective, and economic use of resources in an accountable, ethical, and development-orientated manner. Now, just one or two observations here. It's quite interesting that the World Bank in 2015 defined value for money in terms of the effective, efficient, and economic use of resources. So what it's saying is value for money. The other interesting thing is, if you look at section 1953, I haven't got it yet. There it is. National legislation must ensure the promotion of values. So you can't say, well, no, we can't read it with 195 because it has to be there. Now, just think of some of the tensions, and I don't want to go into this debate, but, you know, if you take, do you interpret fair, equitable, competitive, and cost-effective to be lowest price? Because lowest price isn't in terms of efficient and effective use of resources. So what we need is a balancing act. Then we come to the promotion of administrative justice, because remember, one of the things that I have learned is that if something is in the Bill of Rights, it trumps everything. Many years ago, I was very involved with putting together building regulations and the last major updates to the building regulations, and we wanted to put in energy usage in buildings. And I was told by the DTI lawyers that I would have to go to Parliament to get Parliament to introduce a requirement for that because sustainability wasn't included in the building regulations of 1977. I got hold of council and got some advice, and the advice that came back is anything in the Constitution, every court of law must take it into consideration in the spirit of what it is. And we went back to DTI and said to them, but excuse me, please, read this. We have a constitutional right to live in an environment that's protected for future generations. And they said to me, fine, go ahead. So we issued regulations without doing that. That's the power. So when we look at administrative justice as part of it, so what we've got to do is, if I just summarize the essence of the Promotion of Administrative Justice Act, is any decision that is made, and remember I have stressed all the time this morning that infrastructure is really all about the decisions that are made, must be done without bias, taking into account relevant considerations, and in good faith, and which are not arbitrary or capricious and are rationally connected. So what we're looking at is reasonableness. So our procurement system has to be reasonable at the same time. And that's where cost effectiveness and efficiencies and all the rest of it really need to be understood. And so to me, the procurement system is all about value for money and reasoned judgment. And you can't have reasoned judgment without information. Okay? Knowledgeable. Yeah. So that's the, and if you look at the public procurement system that I've put up there, and you run through all of that, those are the principles that are going to underpin it. I'm now going to come to the Government Immovable Asset Management Act. So an immovable asset is any immovable asset acquired or owned by government, and the way in which it's defined, it does include land. So the difference between what we spoke about infrastructure assets, you've now got land at the same time. So we started off right yesterday when we spoke about what is infrastructure. We highlighted it's just people finding the right word for the context, and so it was an immovable asset. Now, essentially what it is GIAMA aims to provide for a uniform framework for the management of an immovable asset that is held or used by a national or provincial department. Doesn't cascade down to municipalities, but I do believe the principles would stand. Okay? It's to ensure the coordination and use of an immovable asset with the service delivery objectives of a national or provincial department, and to provide for issuing of guidelines and minimum standards in respect of immovable assets by a national or provincial department. Now, we'll come to that in a moment because there hasn't been much issued in terms of the Act. I can't find anything. I might have missed something, but I think there's only been the issuing of energy usage in buildings. Recently, the regulations were issued for that in terms of the Act. Other than that, it's silent. But the principles are excellent. And the whole idea there is you defining who is a custodian and who is a user. So the custodian is the national or provincial department, and a custodian is acts as the caretaker of immovable assets of which it is the custodian, and may acquire and manage any immovable assets and dispose of those assets, and is liable for any action or omission in relation to the immovable asset which it is the custodian. So it's all about assigning responsibility to a custodian. The National Department of Public Works is the custodian, okay, or one of the custodians. The user is a national or provincial department that uses or intends to use an immovable asset in support of its service delivery objectives, and includes a custodian in relation to an immovable asset. So what you've there got responsibilities of who is using the asset and who is looking after the asset management of the asset. Those are the two principles. And look, I'll come to it with the whole issue of implementers, implementing agents, and where this all came about. In terms of our old constitution, prior to 1994, Public Works had the vote. They had the money. They were both user and custodian. What then happened is, with the PFMA coming out, assigning of budgets went to the user departments and things like that. So this is where it came about. The context of it was to assign responsibility between different entities. Now, these are the principles of immovable asset management. And think about what I spoke about this morning with some of the asset management functions, because I don't see anything that conflicts. I think it really supports and puts it very well. The following are the principles of immovable asset management. An asset must be used efficiently and become surplus to a user if it does not support the service delivery objectives at an official level and cannot be upgraded to that level. What's different to what we spoke about with asset management? That's exactly what it's all about. Is you assigning responsibility to perform all the asset management functions. Alternative service delivery methods that do not require immovable assets must be identified and considered to minimize the demand for immovable assets. There are your principles for asset management, for demand management. If we wanted to raise it into the Public Procurement Act, here is your starting point, because all you're going to do is share the good practices here with the municipalities. Okay? In relation to the acquisition, it must be considered whether an immovable asset solution is viable. An immovable asset currently used by the state is adequate to meet a change in its service delivery objectives. We spoke about repurposing, transferring, all of those kind of good things. The cost of the immovable asset, as well as its operational and maintenance costs throughout its life cycle, justifies its acquisition in relation to the cost of service. I mean, this is the principles of asset management. It's an immovable asset that are currently used must be kept operational to function in a manner that supports efficient service delivery. Now, we're now introducing something slightly different, because we're now talking about operating an infrastructure. And this is where the concept of facilities management comes in. Now, we spoke this morning about asset management, of realizing value from assets, whereas an international definition for facilities management would be the organizational function which integrates people, places, and processes within the built environment with the purpose of improving the quality of life of people and the productivity of the core business. So facilities management would include cleaning, security, maintenance, all those other good things. Just aside, we've been talking about the Public Procurement Act. If you read the definition of infrastructure, and it talks about the maintenance and goods and services for maintenance, it doesn't talk about goods and services for operation. Operations is somewhere separate. Am I right? Yeah. Okay, so that's the added dimension to it. If you speak to facilities managers, they will say to you asset management is part of facilities management. I don't want to go into the contests of this. Everybody wants to have their profession as the overarching one. But to me, what we've been talking about with infrastructure is all about asset management, in keeping it in the condition, which is separate to running what some people would call the soft services, which are very important. And then it's got, when an immovable asset is acquired or disposed of, best value for money must be realized. That's what we were talking about this morning. In relation to disposal, the custodian must consider whether the immovable asset can be used by another user or jointly by other users in relation to social development initiatives of government, in relation to government socioeconomic objectives, and so on. So there are the principles for disposal management, if you want to put it that way. So we can draw a lot from this act. I think it's got some good principles in it. I must say that in preparing for here, I reread it. I haven't read it for a long time, and it was good to see how the compatibility, if you start looking at what infrastructure asset management is, it aligns with all the principles. I don't think anything is missing. Okay, so those are the principles. If we now go to responsibilities of users and custodians, because what we're now trying to say is the user has the budget, but doesn't have the capabilities to do asset management. That's the underlying assumption. Okay. If Public Works doesn't have the capacity to do that asset management function, that's something different. But I'm talking about what the Act is looking at, is to say we have our expertise to do the asset management with the custodian. So, yeah. They should have. Well, let's see what's in the Act, because that's what they should be providing. If it hasn't been forthcoming, it hasn't been updated. I do know that even in the old South Africa, I'm talking about prior to 1994, there wasn't very good, particularly I think the international side of things, of all our properties internationally, nobody really knew about. I worked very closely with Sivi Gounden, who eventually became one of the DGs. And the only way he got the leases under control was to stop payment and say to people, if you didn't bring me your lease, I won't pay you. That's the only way they could get the register. So don't think we've always had it in the past tip top. So if there are gaps, it'll be there, but let's just see what the responsibilities are. A custodian a custodian immovable asset management plan. So there's a requirement here to produce an asset management plan. That plan has got to give a portfolio strategy and a management plan. So there it is. We spoke this morning about your policy and your levels of service. I would interpret it to be in that, if you look at it in terms of asset management. I would also see the management plan for each immovable asset throughout its life cycle. How can you comply with that if you don't have the register? If you can't identify the asset and you don't know what its condition is, how can you comply with that? In other words, if we take everything we've spoken this morning about, it's the level underpinning it. If you go through that, you're going to comply with this. It's performance assessment of the immovable asset. There is your condition assessment, because you can't assess its performance if you don't know what its condition is. A condition assessment of the movable asset every 5 years. So there is a requirement that you've got to go out and find your assets and go and check them. And I think there lies in the problem. I'm not sure that that is actually taking place. I think we have pockets of excellence, but I don't see the pockets of excellence across the country, because if the pockets of excellence were across the country, we wouldn't have a SAICI report card that we looked at earlier on. So, we can just make that inference. The maintenance of activities required and the total and true cost of the maintenance activities identified, and a disposal strategy and management plan. That, to me, is a summary of the asset management principles that I went through with you this morning. Is there anything missing? So therefore, we should be having the issues you're raising and saying, where is the register? Where is its condition? What is its value? All the rest of it.
Yeah, let me give you some examples, right? Schools and police stations are assets of the Department of Public Works. Some might argue, well, so they belong to maybe the provincial department or whatever. But I think the act is clear that
Yeah.
Public Works National owns it, and then we then in turn have a sort of a user or what's the word that you found there? A custodian, the custodian of these assets that would be responsible for maintenance and all that. Now, during the apartheid era, one of the things that the government did at that time was build a lot of schools in predominantly minority communities.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
you didn't have as many schools in black African areas, but for example, in the former Indian areas, you have a school in every unit. The problem is that over the years, these schools have been underutilized to the point where schools are not even being used. Vandalism is at its highest there. Criminals are using the schools as hideouts. They're not being maintained. They are posing a nuisance to the neighboring communities. And this has been going on for years. In spite of representations made by communities and councillors and all of that. Absolutely nothing has been done about it. In fact, there was one case where a person was killed in a school which belongs to, and I fear that someone might say the department needs to be charged for not performing its responsibility and taking care of those facilities. The same with a police station. I happen to have been the chairperson of the police forum at the time. The police station was collapsing, absolutely collapsing. And as a community, we had to go out there and start to build and do things on our own to keep it, usable. So clearly, if there is a register and we know the state of our assets, we should also have an understanding of maintenance and how maintenance is being done. Because if these things are being followed as it ought to be in terms of the letter of the law, we shouldn't be having such a
100%.
situation.
I couldn't agree
So-
with you more. The
so
fact
what-
is it's not taking place. So, I mean, even if you look there, the custodian must prepare the immovable asset management
I saw
plan.
that.
What
Now-
is the quality of the asset management
Now,
plan?
can
Is
we
it
as a
reliable?
committee request, I don't want to say support staff or anything like that in case they might say I'll have to do it myself. But I'm saying that can we start to request, obviously register might be a full up this entire room, but to start separating them into categories and getting the assets and getting the state of our assets, a report on those. Shouldn't we be doing that?
I see no reason why not. I mean, I'm sure that's your decision. If
Where-
your oversight functions
Yeah.
are to ensure that things are done. But I mean, one can even take it a little bit further. I'll come to you in a moment, Edwin. But just, I mean, if we think about it, we live in an electronic age. You know, I was talking to you about the SAICI report card. I've seen some countries in Africa where what they do is they publish on the internet the assets that the state has, what their condition is, and people can log in from their cell phones to report that this is not right. This is, I mean, there's so many things we can do, but someone has got to take leadership in that, and it's up to this committee to decide where they want to go.
So the chair is not here, but I think it is a point we need to flag. Someone on my right needs to flag it, and we need to bring it back to the committee. And if it means us even doing site visits and visiting some of these infrastructure, it will be a good idea. I mean, we're going to Telkom Towers tomorrow and getting a report on Telkom Towers, and my fear is that we were not doing our work that may have resulted in the challenges we're currently facing
No,
there.
You're quite right. Let me just relate, and I'll come to you just as a little bit of a side. I remember many years ago, I was in the United States, and the World Bank were then talking about the starting of corruption and anti-corruption measures and things like this. And they described it as, what would you do if you were walking through a parking area and you saw a brown paper packet, you picked it up and you had a look in it, and you see it had 50,000 Rand in it? Would you A, say this is a windfall, take it home and enjoy it? would you try and find security and try and find the owner of it? And C, would you go home, sleep on it, and then the next day try and find the owner? Make your decision which one you want. Fine. The point they then said, he's an entrepreneur. the point they said is same scenario, and there is a camera there, and there is a possibility that you were detecting, picking it up. Would you change your decision? Now, the principle I'm talking about here is if no one is asking the questions, you're never going to get the information coming out. So part of oversight is to say, show me what you've got. That's the whole principle, like that little story I told you about, is because you can get caught out by not having the information. Edwin, yeah.
Thank you very much. It's interesting, and I support what Honourable Reddy has said 100%. And I think those are the questions that we should be asking. I just wanted to share a little bit of insight from my experience, having worked for the department, not the national department, provincial departments before, but we worked very closely with the national department in terms of the immovable asset register. And from how I remember it, the Act was enacted in 2007. But it obviously required a lot of work. So I think with the permission of Treasury, there were minimum requirements that were brought out and phased in so that the asset register could be completed over time. But it's important for us as a committee to understand that this register falls under and is a responsibility of the property management trading entity. And it is the fact that this register is not completed and is inherently incorrect, that PMTE, that entity, has not been able to get a clean audit, which is also the result of it not ever having been registered as an official entity. So if we want to look at something, I think we should highlight this, as you said, Visvin. We must highlight this as something that we as a committee must hold the department to account for, because if we want the department to register its PMTE, its property management trading entity, to be able to generate revenue, which is what we need, because obviously the fiscus is not where it's supposed to be, so that the department can reinvest into its infrastructure, the 28 billion rand maintenance backlog, building new facilities, etc., etc. This is like really the heart and core of the department. And I also know, those conditional assessments cost a lot of money because they have to be done every 5 years. And these reports are done. They are done, but the question we should be asking is, what are they doing with them?
Exactly.
What are they doing with them? And it's all good and well to receive a report on every single asset. And National Public Works has 80,000. Imagine how much it costs to do a condition assessment of each of those 80,000 properties. Who's reading all these reports? Who's putting them into the UAMPs and the CAMPs? The UAMPs being the User Asset Management Plan, which is there, and the CAMP being the Custodian Asset Management Plan. So there's a lot of work to be done, but I really believe, and that's just my personal thought and opinion, is that Public Works cannot fulfill its mandate without getting PMTE to work.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Just one of the other things, just aside, just to mention, just from my experience, if I could chirp in with schools, a lot of the maintenance was handed over to governing bodies of schools, and they don't do it. And so, huge backlogs there. So in some areas, maintenance hasn't been done for many decades. So it's a problem. But as I say, my role is to try and jog some of the things that you guys want to ask questions about and start debating. So I'm glad you're picking up on these things. Just to wrap up on the custodians side, at least the user side, if you look at that, they're developing a user immovable asset management plan, which talks about the strategic needs assessment. In other words, the prioritization that we spoke about this morning. And then we've got an acquisition plan, which is part of into the procurement processes. I'll come to you in a second. Operation plan and immovable asset surrender plan. So in fact, if we look at it, demand management is done by the custodian, and it's finalized and translated into your procurement planning would come from the user, because the user has the budget. You want to raise?
Yeah, I'm just concerned about the issue of the asset registration or asset management. I just want to find out if the sixth administration, did they ever ask for a complete register of the assets belonging to public works, and if they did they get that register? Because it's clear there is a gap somewhere, and it's worrying if indeed what we are picking up here it's indeed the case. Thank you.
You want to answer that one? Because I
Yeah.
can't.
I, I thought it was a direct question. So, because we're the common denominator that's been around since the sixth parliament as well. So, it's been a question that the previous committee has also been asking the department. And the response has always been that there is no final immovable asset register. So the country's landlord does not have a finalized immovable asset register. And this is also because there's been mistakes or other mishaps regarding the procurement of a system that's supposed to be doing that kind of work. So the system will be fed by information that will be collated regionally through regional offices that will be fed into the department. But that system is also dysfunctional. So that's the current situation. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Nola, for that very important information. And I think each one of us here should be very concerned. I mean, you're supposed to be the custodian, the owner of property you don't know of. And it's the example I illustrated earlier where communities are complaining. It's clearly, this is the reason. So I think it needs to be a priority of the seventh administration and to make this an urgent thing that needs to be done. If the one takeaway that comes out of this strategic session should be, let's home in on the property portfolio. You cannot get the PMTTP, whatever, to work and to be effective if we do not have an asset register. Because my colleague requested a register of assets, but I would like to take it a step further. I would like to know what is the condition of these assets. What are income generating assets, and are we getting maximum value from these assets, or should we consider disposing of these? There may be investors out there who would be interested in taking over these assets. We're keeping them in our books, and they're actually proving to be a liability to us because they are of no use to us as this department, but they may be of use to somebody else. And yeah, we're paying rates for that. We're responsible for the security there, the maintenance, and all of that. No, thank you, Rod. I think this is a matter we need to put up as number one. Members on my right should please make a record of it.
Are you asking them to be your messenger?
Yeah, I'm asking this question because if we don't get that register, that would mean we have failed in our oversight responsibility. Because why are we here in the first place? Because monies were spent in building those properties, and then they've just disappeared, and nobody knows where they are. I'll make an example. I hope I'm right when it comes to this one. In Ulundi, it used to be a capital city of KwaZulu-Natal, and now that capital city moved to Pietermaritzburg, and houses that belong to this to public works, they have been invaded, and I doubt that there's any record. I doubt, and I'm not talking about one or two houses. I'm talking about a huge number, yes, of houses. They've been invaded. I remember my father used to stay in Ulundi, and one lady just came in and then she took over, and then she claims that that house belongs to her. You know, So my father used to be an official for KwaZulu government, and then thereafter he left the house after retiring, and then this lady moved in, and then she's claiming that that house belongs to her, when in actual fact it didn't belong to my father. Didn't belong to it doesn't even belong to the lady. It belongs to Public Works. So as a committee, like what my colleague here said, we really need that register. Otherwise, we wouldn't be effective in what we're doing. Yeah.
If I may just make an observation here, I think that the excuse of we haven't got a complete register, so we can't give you, you should ask the question is if it's not complete, what level of completeness is it? What is the estimated reliability? And what can you tell me about it? Because you see, if you have an asset management base that is correct, and if I go to some of our high performing universities, they can tell you what area of building they've got. We can apply a cost norm to it. We can come up with what the value of their assets are. And you know that for building for regular maintenance, maybe the 2-3% you need. So you can budget because you have an idea of what it is. If you know the age of your buildings and you know where they are in terms of the curve of useful life left, you know what your liabilities are for the future. Because we're going to come to a stage where we may not have any money for new works by purely putting fires out for maintenance. So I think you should try and pose the questions that you get some value, because if what is the value of the registers of what they've got? What can it tell you? Yeah.
Thank you, Doctor. I just want to actually ask you a question, and maybe you can enlighten us as to whether you think it might be of benefit to this portfolio committee. Obviously, Public Works is a massive department with many entities, and it's very difficult, even for myself, who's worked for that department for almost 10 years, to wrap my head around all of it. If we were to take, for example, like you've just mentioned, if we were to take a university, for example, I can think of UCT as a very good example where they've got an excellent,
It's well run, yeah.
very well, not the university, yes, but the buildings, the
No, talking about
facilities.
I've done oversight visits
Okay.
for 3-4 years to them.
100%. So my question to you is, do you think it would be of benefit for a committee like this to maybe receive or request the university to come, or have that facilities manager, the individual responsible for the facilities of the university, to come and explain to us how they do what they do, what principles they use, and so that we can understand from that smaller perspective or smaller scale what Public
I
Works
think
should
it
be
would be
doing.
an excellent suggestion.
Okay.
Because what it is because then you can start with what is a best practice. What can you aspire to? If you're with me, and that would be a good university to pick on. You probably Stellenbosch in the same category down that area of the
It's
woods.
just that they're close to Parliament, so.
Yeah, take it, but UCT is well run. They've had superb, even the infrastructure of new spend and things like that. They've always been one of the high performers. So certainly do that. And I think they'd be open to do that, because I think, look, they are a public institution at the end of the day. They'd use public money, but that will give you a demonstration in a microclimate on how they're operating. And remember, they also have a few curved balls with distant campuses and things like that.
The last one, Doc. What is the way forward on this one? Are we going to be assisted in getting that, or what is? Or maybe I'll have to ask it again in our next meeting. Thank you.
Well, I think you've got to, the purpose of this is for me to expose you to the things, to ask the questions and things like that, not to resolve. I'm not here as a facilitator to resolve. If you need further inputs in anything like this, Wits University is very happy to try and accommodate, to bring in people that can assist you, because we're all batting for the same team.
Absolutely. Can I just come in and assist some of the members? The Sixth Parliament's work has been recorded in the legacy report, and the outcomes of its oversight over the immovable asset register is there. So members should go there and empower themselves, look at that, and take it from there. The we in fact had a meeting in which we discovered that the record is on an Excel document. Excel. Which means I could take the number out or the name out and put my name next to it of a property. So it's not controllable.
You can steal it.
It's not controllable. And so there's been the other thing members need to look at as well is the systems that's required to hold and control it. And then you're going to find, if you look at the legacy report and the recommendations, that there has been money spent on a system that has never been rolled out to control the movable asset register.
Sorry.
We invited them into a room to show us electronically what it looks like and how it works.
Okay.
So why don't you leave it as
doesn't
just
look like
getting...
we are able to. I'm sorry, Doctor. It doesn't look like we're able to solve this thing as you have perfectly said. I think we need to, in our next meetings, put it as an item that we need to look into and have further
And
discussion.
if you had a session, like a morning session or something like this, that UCT could run and give you an idea of what systems they employ, because a lot of the universities do have these asset management tools. They've also linked it into their facilities management and all of that. So in other words, you can get an idea of what is possible. Because remember, universities are also running on very, very tight budgets.
Yes, just if I may, Prof. A proposal would be that the perfect platform to ask these questions, honorable members, is for starters, the Thursday meeting that we'll have with the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure, because they're the very first entity that will be presenting to us regarding how the department has been performing in the previous year, which is 23-24, will be the AG. The findings of the AG will tell exactly this that we're talking about. And most of these problems, and as honorable members have been saying, that are are there because there's no immovable asset register. The second one, the department will also present, after we've heard the AG, the department will then go into the intricacies of their own performance, financial and non-financial. That too will have to be done in that Thursday meeting. So that's a perfect platform to ask all of these questions. Actually, and I think this is the sentiment that the members on Honorable Reddy's right are sharing, it's coming out properly, just as we envisaged, that we wanted to get members of parliament to expose them, to gain an insight theoretically of what they ought to be doing in the first 3 days in the form of this capacity building session. And then immediately, while the information is still nice and fresh in their heads, delve into the practicality of the role that members will be playing in this portfolio. Thank you, Prof.
Yeah, so I'm a little bit confused with the left and the right and the center. I hope people are sitting in the right places.
Perhaps just a final bit of information that for members, especially mentioning the Ulundi properties, for example. The Sixth Parliament also asked for a report and what the department had called Operation Bring Back. Because what they had attempted was to actually engage the public who know of, public works properties that that are not on the asset register, or what the department had described as unknown properties. And they gave an amnesty period as an incentive to ensure that if people do know of properties that belong to the state, that they then are able to let the department know. So maybe this call can be renewed by the members as one of the instances of addressing the properties that are either abandoned, etc., and being vandalized, as some members have indicated, and also indicating that they've been taken over by clearly people who are not the actual owners, and that the program Public Works and Infrastructure actually reports on its current progress, and maybe if it's still a program that they're running, and if not, then they revive it if that is one of the issues that the members wish to bring forth. Thanks.
Okay, let me wrap this session up, or you want to raise something quickly?
Yeah, Prof, just quickly, because I think you've worked with institutions of higher learning a lot.
Yeah.
And we're looking at universities mostly and their ability to sort of keep a good eye on their assets. I saw on the I think the risk register that you gave us with the civil engineers, that TVET colleges, their risk or their asset registry is not that great. Just need to know the discrepancy between TVET colleges and, in your observation, the practices between the leadership and management of TVET colleges and universities that have such a great system in terms of how they manage their assets and are able to sort of glean value out of them.
Well, in my experience, because the team that I worked with for the delivery of the new universities wasn't stood down, we then transferred across to work with oversight for 4 years with DHET. And when we went around, what we learned is the quality of the governance of the organization. If you had a VC that was invested and understood infrastructure and had a team that supported it, you had a high-performing university. The minute you had a disconnect between that, you're down at the bottom. Like if I told you that the university, like take University of Mpumalanga, they won an award recently for the first time. CBE gave an award for finishing projects on time. They never even made a submission, but they won it. Now, the VC, if you go and speak to her, she's a social scientist. She has on her cell phone a GIS model of the Great Hall. If you want to go and talk to her about the building, she will navigate herself through the building to where the room you're talking about. Now, when you've got someone engaged like that, infrastructure works. Decisions are quick made. I know it's an extreme example, but what I'm saying is where you have a disinterested council and you leave it to Bob the Builder to try and sort the maintenance out, there is your problem. And I think the TVET colleges don't have the same strong governance that you're getting at some of the councils. Now, some of the councils have, like University of Mpumalanga, they have a facilities, an FPIC, facilities committee of council. It's actually chaired by a developer from Hall Longmore. He's the biggest developer in Nelspruit. So you're bringing expertise in to give that strategic leadership.
Okay. But also, wouldn't you argue that University of Mpumalanga is a relatively new university, and so the technology is much more advanced? I'd like maybe...
They're not into the maintenance side. They're coming into that. The new build they've done well on. The maintenance is coming. But if you look at University of Pretoria, most of their buildings are more than 60 years old. They're all heritage buildings. And if you try and upgrade a heritage building, you're in a nightmare. UCT is in the same position. Stellenbosch is in the same position. The TVET colleges are generally newer, but I think it's all about the leadership side of things. So to me, it all comes down to if there's a leadership understanding and a structuring of the organization along the lines that we spoke about, things happen. And I think that's it. So that's, if you got hold of one of the universities as that are performing well and get the microcosm of what's going on, I think you'll have a good handle, because then you can get feedback and see exactly how they've done it. I think it's an excellent suggestion. Okay, just to wrap up then, the responsibility of users and custodians. You'll notice that there is the accounting officer's got to submit the custodian immovable asset management plan to a relevant treasury. The idea of that, you can now start seeing the demand management being fed into the budgeting process. And then you've got the accounting officer for the user must submit a copy of its immovable asset management plan to the relevant treasury. So in other words, the whole budgeting process is intricately linked to these asset management plans. And if these asset management plans are not done correctly, the whole system falls apart. So I think it comes back to the procurement side of things. This has all got to be fed in and circulated through. The last things on the government immovable asset management plan. The minister may prescribe minimum requirements and content and management of plans and all sorts of things. I haven't seen any documents that have come out. There's nothing on the websites. The only thing that has been issued was at the beginning of the year in January 2024, you had the integrated renewable energy and resource efficiency regulations. And that's all about renewable energy, energy efficiency, water efficiency, and alternative waste management. So some of the sustainability issues have been raised, but that is all. So there is an area, but I think it's also a question of, is the immovable asset management the best place to put it? Or is it something we should try for the Public Procurement Act? Is it something that CIDB should be doing? We've also got, as far as the individuals that are doing asset management, I have put up the Engineering Council. They have the stages. Remember, I showed you the stages of development. That is, all the built environment professions follow that for the design. EXA has put in operation in accordance with the purpose statement for life of project, maintain the as-built state and shut down permanently. There's your asset management. Do we create a specialist category? Because asset management is not something that's taught as a basic course at university. Do we have different qualifications come in? Because at the end of the day, if we're going to professionalize the public sector, how do we identify the individuals that do it? So these are the kind of questions that I'm posing that you could think about. The other side of it is there's also a lot of information about asset management. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are many international standards. I've listed some of them there. We have the asset management side of things. The city's IDMS is an excellent document. South Africa has been very active in the engineering fraternity in terms of asset management. It just hasn't translated into practice, if you want to put it in the public sector. So I don't think we need to create things. All we've got to do is actually do the business of asset management and get it going. So even though you might say nothing has been issued, there's enough guidance that is out there. Infrastructure Development Act, very quickly. It's basically to provide for the facilitation and coordination of public infrastructure development, ensure that infrastructure development is given priority in planning, approval, and implementation. In other words, to provide a coordinating committee that if there are blockages, you can try and get unblocked. Ensure that development goals of the state are promoted, the management of infrastructure during all the life cycle stages, and it's also tasked with Infrastructure Development Act also tasks a Presidential Infrastructure Coordinating Committee to coordinate, integrate, and accelerate implementation, develop a single common national infrastructure plan that will be monitored and centrally driven, develop a 20-year planning framework. So it was all about the long-term planning. Remember, we spoke this morning about the short and medium term, to have a long-term pipeline of projects. Very noble act in many of its, in putting it all together. But what it's got is you've got your Presidential Infrastructure Coordinating Committee chaired by the President. You have your Infrastructure Investment Committee, and you have Strategic Infrastructure Projects. And you basically have Infrastructure South Africa is providing some secretariat support to all of this. So they're also involved in all of these processes, is not only just providing the investment studies, but also to provide some support. And there you have your Infrastructure Investments Review Committee is headed by Infrastructure South Africa. You have your members and you have your technical working groups, and the project sponsors would be the organizations that require infrastructure. Very simply, as I understand it, they've come up with a SIDS methodology that they talk about. And remember, I spoke to you this morning that they base it all on an international document that is produced by the UK government, the international guidance. It's all aligned with the G20 principles. And so Infrastructure South Africa, one of their primary tasks is to do an appraisal process through this methodology. And that was where we spoke about business cases this morning, and we had the 5-case model, all of those things. That's the type of thing that they are getting involved in. So infrastructure projects or programs that require funding need to be categorized as debt capital markets, infrastructure fund as a blended financial structuring mechanism, or the fiscus. Because what has happened worldwide, it's not just South Africa, people have realized to address the backlog of infrastructure, you need different financing mechanisms. It just can't come from the fiscus all the time. So we've got to find different ways. And so assets have become, infrastructure has become an asset class, and private sector can invest in it. So it's all of these kind of around the financial side of things that they're trying to put together. So the SIDS appraisal process, they have stages that I have mapped out here. I'm not going to go through the stages, but you'll see that there's a different stage, the origination, registration, early business case appraisal, intermediate, funding, final business case appraisal, and there you've got your gates. Now, one of the criticisms we had earlier on was raised by the honourable member in the corner. It was talking about the issue of public-private partnerships. What happens with public-private partnerships, they go through this whole gate system, and this has been historically done with Treasury as well. And the idea is that you test the business case all the way, and then you go to the market and you only award the PPP after the tenders have come in. It's a very long and lengthy process, not attractive to developers, because you've got to go, it's fantastic for the state to manage risk. But from a developer, we need to find ways in the future of earlier contractor involvement. If you know that you're going to be getting the job and you've got a competitive stage at an earlier stage and you've selected your partner, then you can work with your partner and you can cut out some of the duplication of transaction advisors, etc., and things like that. I was recently talking to the CEO of FEDIC, who was talking about the UK is even thinking about the higher cost of going through some of these processes in duplicating design before you get your partner and to try and revise it. So it's something that's not just we grappling with, it's worldwide a problem of how do we get the private sector engaged. But it is a robust process, and there's nothing wrong with it. And so in terms of the cases they've got, they look at an early business case, an intermediate business case, and a full business case. So the ideas with it is the case for change is established in the early case. You then go a decision to proceed with procurement after the intermediate. You can stop there and not necessarily go to the next one. But if you do go to the next one, then you've got the full business case. But remember, private sectors had to invest in design to price it, and it's quite an expensive process. So they're not too keen on doing too much of that unless they've got good odds in getting the job. So that's just to give you an idea of what Infrastructure South Africa does. I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to go through the last slide very quickly. I'm not going to go into much detail. We've just published it this year, the Climate Change Act, and I do believe that in the 7th term that we've got, this is going to become a bigger issue as we've got the climate emergency. Countries are asking about it. If we want funding for certain developments, you need to tap into the green funds. And so our whole idea of this is coming out of our constitutional rights. And I've given you a definition of climate change resilience. We did discuss it lightly yesterday, that you've got a sense of it. And I think the thing is, what is coming out is every organ of state that exercises a power or performs a function that is affected by climate change, which is everyone in the industry, is entrusted with powers and duties aimed at achievement, promotion, and protection of sustainable environment must review and, if necessary, amend, coordinate, harmonize their policy, laws, measures, programs, and decisions to ensure that the risks of climate change act impacts and associated vulnerabilities are taken into consideration and to give effect to the principles of the Act. So I think this is something that as we move forward is going to become a bigger issue. So let me stop there and let's break for tea, and then we'll come back at 3 o'clock and we'll finish up at 4. Okay. Okay, I think we're in the last lap. And I'm going to kick off with, I think, something that's central to many of our problems, the whole concept of implementing agents. Okay. Now, the starting point is the capital of infrastructure requirements of government departments were historically, and what I'm talking about prior to 1994, were budgeted for directly within the vote of the Department of Public Works. So there was no such thing as users and custodians. Public Works had the money. Okay. What then happened with the Public Finance Management Act, to budgets were transferred to the user department. So in other words, Public Works didn't have the budget for their clients. Okay. So the PFMA changed this practice as it requires expenditure associated with the department's operations or activities to be accounted for directly through the department's vote. This gave rise to user departments who could be called sponsors. For example, Department of Health, Department of Education, and implementing agents such as DPW with different roles and responsibilities. Now, this problem, I can remember going with the CEO of the CIDB in 2003 to Treasury to start the IDA program. And the whole idea of the IDA program was to try and resolve the communication between user departments and custodians, if you want to use that language. When I did the report for the National Planning Commission, I found that original submission. And if I showed you the original submission and where we are today, I think in 20-something years, it hasn't changed. We've still got the same problems. So let me try and analyze it that you can understand where the issues are. What I've done, and it is described in detail in this client guide that I've given you, is I've tried to divide the client function up into two functions. One which cannot be delegated and one which could be delegated. Okay? So the one that can't be delegated is the client performs the role of where the focus is typically on the funding and the project outcomes and the provision of high-level strategic direction when corrective action is necessary to change the project to bring it closer to what was planned and when decisions regarding significant departures need to be made. So just understand it from this point of view. The client owns the project. Okay? They also own the outcomes. So if things go sour, you can't blame the people who delivered it because it's going to impact the business and the strategic objectives of the person who commissioned it. So the fundamental role of the client is to specify what the requirements are for the project and to ensure that the project achieves the business case. Simple as that. That cannot be outsourced. That's the accountability that they sit with. Now, the second level of putting it together is the function 2 is where the focus is directly on what needs to be delivered on an infrastructure project, the provision of the strategic, technical, financial, and operational direction to realize the client's value proposition, what information is used to effectively oversee the implementation of the project and to settle what is due in terms of the various contracts. So at a high level, the owner of the project is going to specify what is required, plan at a higher level, and then the other function kicks in with a bit more detailed planning, bit more detailed specification, the procurement, and the overseeing of delivery. So I've now split what we spoke about this morning into two buckets, if you will. The one bucket you can't outsource, the other one you could. Okay? And you could actually outsource that to the private sector. How does a PPP work? The PPP is the client retains function 1, function 2 is handed over to someone else to deliver, whether it's a government department or whether it is through the PPP slightly different because you're actually giving the design and the outputs, you're putting an output specification and you're requiring the delivery against that. But I'm just talking in broad terms, that is the dividing line. So function 1 relates to the ownership of the investment, the sponsor function or the owner, and the primary responsibility is to ensure the strategic alignment of the project and program with the business objectives of the entity. And that happens in private sector as well. If a private sector company wants to build a shopping center, they don't necessarily have the contractors and the expertise to do that, but they have to give the client direction to the team that puts that together. So the delivery management function is always going to be there. The second function relates to the specifying of requirements to the delivery team and managing delivery outcomes with the intention that the client's value proposition is realized. So your client delivery manager can perform the function 2 responsibilities, and the governing structure that I spoke about this morning must retain the function 1 activities. So if we go to the diagram that I showed you this morning, the problem you can now see is your function 1 is your client function department at the top, the governance and oversight, and where you've got the implementing agent is going to provide the client delivery management functions and is going to provide the procurement. Now, a lot of departments of why they want an implementing agent, particularly, I'm not talking about public works, like particularly going for DBSA, because they want to wash their hands of procurement. Okay? So, anyway, that's the way it works. Now, it can be done. Your implementing agents would be IDT, DBSA, Department of Public Works, and they would then perform the buying function. You're still going to have the supply function that we spoke along, but it's that interface that needs to be managed. Now, for example, when the new universities was built, we had DHET owned the project. Wits University provided the client delivery manager and the team. So to get the coordination done correctly, there was every second week, the DDG in DHET met with the client delivery manager and resolved issues. In other words, they were kept appraised as part and parcel. In other words, the client delivery manager should be an extension. Now, the problem occurs is if the client delivery manager doesn't own the business case of the client. Now, I can remember from many years ago, so don't put it necessarily into today's context. I can remember possibly in about 2007 doing some work with the IDMS programs and things like that. And I was in a room and we went around the table and we said to people, tell us what the objective of your organization is in infrastructure. And I'll never forget, we went around and we came to the Department of Health, and Department of Health said, well, the department is combating malaria and tuberculosis in this province, and we need hospitals and clinics to support that objective. There was a client who understood what it was all about. We went to Public Works and we said, now what is your objective? And they said to me, to develop emerging contractors. Can you see the disjuncture? I know it's an extreme event, but as I say, this is what came out in a meeting of what people were thinking about. And you see, this is the difficulty with the implementing agent and the client body is to get alignment of objectives. When we delivered as an implementing agent the new universities, there was total alignment. And if that is not there, it's dumped. So in other words, you go to like the common practice, and not necessarily with with Department of Public Works, but very prevalent with DBSA. You get DBSA in, they appoint a consultant to run it, and so now you've got another party with their own objectives, and you've got 3 different objectives that you're trying to align. Whereas if you were talking about having capacity, and we spoke earlier about trying to build capacity, if you can get a client delivery manager to lead the project and you can commit him on a 3 to 5 year contract as an individual, you can populate the teams to provide the necessary support. Can be a combination of your own staff. If you're lacking skills, bring someone in on a part-time basis as an individual. But if you do work in this arrangement and bringing in people from the private sector, the rules of the game is if you're part of the buying function, you can't do the supply function. That's a conflict of interest. Because then you're in an advisory capacity, because a knowledgeable client, nobody knows everything about infrastructure. They need to be supported. So if I went back to the example of the new universities, the client delivery manager was in fact the first CEO of the CIDB. He happened to be an architect incidentally, but he was a superb leader of a project. DHET asked him one day, they said, look, we understand what Ron does. Ron does the procurement. We know that Ludwig does the spatial planning, but what do you do? And he turned around, and I think he gave the right answer. He said, I'm like the conductor in an orchestra. In other words, I need this. I go and get advice. I make my decision. I do it in consultation with the department, but anything I don't know, I have the people behind to ask, but the people behind are not running the project. They're not decision makers. And the minute you get to that, we get away from the threats of the private sector and the threats of people taking over. The problem is when you go and send an implementing agent in its totality to a company, it's the company rules of what the objectives are. You're introducing different roles and conflicts. So if we look at the implementing agent, some of the things they need to watch out for, they need to ensure that specialized specific requirements will achieve the required benefits. The specified requirements will achieve the required benefits of the business case and provide value for money. They've got to maintain momentum in the project, provide clear governance structures founded on the principles of honesty, accountability, and integrity, established and maintained. They've got to do the interface management between between stakeholders at least, and they've got to account for expenditure. What we learned very carefully is, like with the university, we ran with their university systems. We had to have a very close relationship between the client delivery management team and the payment department to make sure that everything was accounted for. And if you are running projects, one of the things we learned, I certainly learned from our client delivery manager, if you want to be the number one client, pay on time. I promise you, if your contractors know that by such and such a date, it's guaranteed payment, you are number one. So we had a client delivery manager, if he heard a contractor hadn't been paid, he went into the payment office and raised merry hell, because that was his power over contractors being eroded. So it's all about relationships. It's all about how you put it together. And I believe it is possible, and you can scale it anywhere if you get the knowledgeable client going. Comfortable with implementing agents, just to understand what should happen. You can see where the difficulties are, and you've got to get alignment of objectives. It's possible, can be done.
Can I just, in terms of what you have presented, what happens in instances where the client refuses to accept the inputs of the technical specialists,
It's their
especially
project.
in terms of the design, etc. Because we've had on oversight instances where you get there and you ask, okay, what was parts of the delays? And then you hear about the design was changed 3, 4, 5 times, despite the input of the technical team. and then it leads to these variation orders, da 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 da, and in the end, the project's budget balloons to such an extent. So even if the client, it is their project, but if you're refusing to, to listen to even the technical team that is telling you that if you're doing this, this is the consequence. If you do that, that's the consequence, and they go ahead. Does that not place, for example, let's say Public Works as the implementing agent, at a huge disadvantage because it does not control the budget?
Look, in some respects, where the problem still comes back to the knowledgeable client. If you've got a client that has a professional team, and you just say to the professional team, and look, I could have shown you we developed for the universities a maturity model. At the basic bottom, it's an ad hoc process. So in other words, all you do is you're relying totally on your design team to tell you what's going on. When you run with a knowledgeable client like we ran with the universities project, the client delivery manager had at his disposal experts in the field that could give any consulting practice pushback in this country. So if you got proper briefings, you got proper guidance, if you understand what I mean. You build relationships with the decision makers so that what would happen is when a plan was put together, you had the client delivery manager and whoever was his expert as a subject matter would go and discuss it with the DDG as to why they've done things, how it works, and you build confidence. It wasn't this business of a consultant-driven project. And a lot of that comes from the consultant-driven projects where they haven't had a proper briefing. And the problem is they it's like, look, my late father-in-law was the city architect of Johannesburg, and he always said, we have champagne tastes on a beer income, okay? So what happens is we've got to cut the cloth to suit. So the consultants have these grand ideas, and then when the costs come in, the budget is too high. That's the discussion we had this morning. We've got to build the culture to designing something to a budget. But you can't set a budget if you're not a knowledgeable client. So it was all about setting the budget. So instead of having the pushback where people said, can we do this or can't we do that? The client delivery manager that we worked with would say, guys, that's a fantastic idea, but it's going to cost more. We're going to go over budget. Tell me where we can save. If you can find somewhere where you can cut some savings out of things that's acceptable to me, I'm more than happy to support that. But you need leadership around that. And I think this is where the problem arises. Okay, the IDT, very quickly, and I'm just going at high level in public information just to try and sort of orientate you roughly where they are. Primarily, IDT is a Schedule 2 company, state-owned, which manages the implementation and delivery of critically needed social infrastructure. So the idea is they specialize in social infrastructure, but primarily they're an implementing agent. In other words, what they're saying is if you don't have the technical ability to deliver a project, come to us, we have it. That's the theory. Whether they've got that capability is another matter. I'm not going into that. Okay. So the IDT has a national office and has 9 provincial regional offices. Its portfolio of programs is broadly categorized into social infrastructure, and they can operate from municipalities anywhere in the state can engage them to act on their behalf. They've obviously got cost recovery, so there are some costs over the implementing agent because it does cost. But bear in mind, if you were running the project yourself as an organization, you still would have had to have some kind of costs attached to it. So it's all about a management. Your delivery management will still be there. So it functions as an implementing agent. The Council for the Built Environment, that was put in 2000. It was established in terms of the Act. And what it is it's an overarching council. It's like an umbrella council. And then you've got these 6 councils underneath it. One of the councils is very much the odd man out. That is the Council for the Property Valuers profession. It's a little bit different to the rest. The other one that's got a slightly difficult role is the Engineering Council of South Africa. The reason being, some of the engineering activities are outside the construction industry, you know, in the manufacturing industry and things like that. So they don't talk totally about the construction industry, they're broader. They've got mining and things like that, mining engineers and all the rest of it. The other councils that we've got, the architectural, landscape architectural, quantity surveying, and project and construction management professions are very much rooted in our basic infrastructure, if you want to put it that way, part of the design processes. Now, just to understand why we have these councils, and these councils are worldwide, you've got to, it's all intended to regulate a profession. So the idea of regulating a profession is you're going to, if you do it through statutory regulations, some countries you can do it through voluntary regulations, and other you can do it through statutory. So for example, like I'm registered with the Engineering Council UK as a chartered engineer. That's a purely voluntary organization. It's not set up by the UK government to do it. It's part of it, it's a different way of doing it. In South Africa, we have legislation, so we have statutory registration. The idea with it is that to regulate the profession, you set standards in the profession. So their first role is set a standard. The second is to keep a register of qualified persons. So they say this is the standard that you need to meet at an entry level to the profession. And I stress entry level. I'm not stressing specialist level, okay? So it's an entry level to the profession, and you award titles. So you get your title depending upon the standard that you met, and it's often linked to university, tertiary education. And we, for example, the Engineering Council is linked to, we have accords, the Washington Accord, the Dublin Accord, and things like this, where we set standards with other countries that we all agree it's the same standard. And so it's all benchmarked and things like that. The architects do the same, etc. And then the idea is you establish rules of conduct, and so you are self-regulating yourself as an individual, that you would not act outside your rules of conduct. And if you do act outside your rules of conduct, you can have disciplinary action taken against you. And the extreme one would be withdrawal of registration. So you can get fined or have your registration withdrawn. Now, what the Council for the Built Environment does is try to set uniform standards across the board for everybody to operate on a similar platform. What they also do is they have an appeals committee that if you feel an action taken by EXA in kicking you off the register, you can appeal to appeals committee with the CBE. I've been on the appeals committee for the last 5 years. I've dealt with every year 1 or 2 appeals. And so then it's an appeal is made and you abide by the decision of the appeals committee, or you go into Promotion of Administrative Justice Act and take it up in terms of legal process. So it's well regulated. The flaw in everything is you might be an ethical person, but if you don't know what you don't know, you can't comply with your code of conduct, if you understand what I mean. But it is a way of regulating the profession, okay? The CBE is the overarching council and provides the framework. It also plays a leadership and strategic role advising the Minister of Public Works on policy matters and legislation. The CBE also acts as a medium of communication between the Minister and the professional councils. Now, I wanted to just touch upon a couple of other things, just so that everybody understands in the room what the different, who's who in the zoo and what they do. I'm just talking about the broad outline of things. The property developers is all about, at least the valuers profession, is determine the value of land and buildings. And that's particularly important for compensation where you expropriate land. It also helps in terms of like the state acquiring land. Like for the University of Mpumalanga, we had to acquire certain private land. And you'd have to, obviously, to arrive at what is a market related and a fair value, you would certainly go to that profession to independently advise you where it is. Okay? Yeah. Yeah, they would come definitely into that. Then you've got the architectural profession, and they plan, design, and review the construction, extension, refurbishment of buildings and spaces for the creative organization of materials and components. So when you look at this building here, the architect would have sorted out the finishes, the spatial dimensions, how big it is going to be, what materials are going to be used, light, shadow, materials, all that type of thing. That's what they're involved in. The Council for Quantity Surveyors, they provide advice on construction, procurement, contracting, and costs. They're basically the cost accountants for mostly buildings, although there's a lot of blurring in disciplines. The quantity surveyors are primarily around buildings. Some of them get involved in civil works and things like that, but the vast majority of their training is focused on buildings. You've then got the landscape architects, and they're responsible for the planning and design of the outdoor and public spaces. And, if you really look at a good development, what is a quality development is one where you've got good use of spaces, you've got wonderful outdoor spaces, and you create the whole environment. And so that's their profession. Then you've got the Engineering Council, which is very broad in engineering and scientific principles and concepts, and that would be applied to manufacturing, mining, construction. If we looked at it in relation to buildings, you'd have the structural engineer would make sure the structure stands up. You've got the air conditioning would be done by your mechanical engineer. Your electrical circuits and things like that would be overseen by your electrical engineer. And then you'd have your civil engineer that would be looking how the building drained and things like that. So there's multidisciplinary professions that come involved into our building space. Civils would be involved with railway lines, harbors, bridges, all of those kind of things as well. And then you've got the Council for Project and Construction Management, and they look at the physical construction or the whole process. Remember, I went out through the 6-7 stages. They would go through the whole lot. Primarily, once again, they have a slant towards the building industry because engineers would be involved in managing the engineering works. So we've got lots of overlaps in it, but that's essentially the various professions that you're looking after. And so I wanted to just highlight in the time that I've got available something called work identification, because this is what I understand coming into play next year. Everything I can read, everything I can find, I understand it is coming into play. So let's try and understand a little bit about it, because rather than me going into some of the other aspects that the council does, I think this is going to be the big thrust of the 7th administration period. So let's try and understand it. The Council for the Built Environment Act states that the council must, after receipt of recommendations of the Council for the Professions, submit and before liaising with the Competition Commission, needed to develop policy for work identification. Then they had to consult with any body or persons or industries that may be affected by the identification of work. Now, our competition law states that the councils, if you try and do restriction of work, you're now creating, you've got vertical and horizontal relationships, you're lessening competition in a market. And so there's been a long-standing spat. I mean, I can remember being involved with work identification with EXA and then the CBE. I'm talking in about 2007 we started. It took many years. Then the Competition Commission said, no, you can't have work identification. And there's been toing and froing and arguments and all the rest of it. And it seems to be that's all out of the way. So the Council for the Built Environment had to determine the policy, consult with all people that are affected by it, then go through a process of, after consulting with the Competition Commission, issue the whole issue of a scope of work for every category of person. So the idea is, if you have a scope of work for a category of person, that person has to operate within that category, can't go outside it. So, for example, when we talk about categories, just that you would understand, so if we took the architectural profession, the architect can work on any building. The senior architectural technologist, and don't quote me, I'm just giving you I can't remember exactly, he's like a 2-story building. An architectural technologist would be the single story. If it's a basic house, it would be down to the draftsman. So you'd have a hierarchy and scopes of work attached to them. And there's been lots of muttering and lots of discussions with everybody to try and get it out. And then, of course, there are overlaps. And how do you deal with the overlaps and all the rest of it? But that all seems to have been sorted out. Then in every single act that you've got of the 5 councils, I'm just taking out the valuers, who are a little bit different. All of the acts would have, and like, for example, the Engineering Act says, a person who is not registered may not perform any kind of work identified for any category of registered person. Yeah.
You see, I think we need to start introducing in these regulatory bodies this notion of community service. Let me explain what I mean.
Yeah.
See, to become a doctor, you've got to do community service before you are registered on the medical council. The same with a lawyer, an attorney, right? Now, we don't have that here, because if you look at the country as a whole, you always hear there's a shortage of engineers. I was quite surprised to hear one of the presenters say that there's 60,000 qualified engineers in the country. I presented a paper for AMISA several years ago, Association of Municipal Engineers of South Africa, and my paper was on the shortage of engineers in the country. But I went right back to the racial demographics of engineers. It's still predominantly white and Indian. And if you go further than that, you go to mathematics as a subject, particularly in the township schools. You find that it is not something that learners are accustomed to. They're not inclined to do pure mathematics. So they've now reduced it and called it maths lit. What we need is engineers who qualify as a requirement to get this affiliation, to do some community service where they would go to schools and introduce pure mathematics to learners. I'll tell you why. What's a problem here? Educators today are not taught this level of mathematics in their studies. So they are unable to take our kids to this level at school. And many of them would encourage the learners to go in with the maths lit, because it's an easier thing for them to understand. But it is our engineering students, on the other hand, who can play a role in opening up the gates for our learners to start getting a sort of...
No, look, it's an excellent idea.
Thanks.
But I think just making the distinction, the difference between community service towards registration or towards your degree, like the medical fraternity, you need to have the doctors. Because look, I've got a son who's a specialist anaesthetist, and I have a daughter who's a speech and hearing therapist, and they both did their community service, learned a hell of a lot from it, but they worked under the guidance of qualified people. So getting people into the state would have to have enough people to do the mentoring, but what you're suggesting is to get the next cohort through the schools to come through. The one encouraging thing I will say, that if I looked at the classes that I teach at WITS, I'm talking postgraduate, I would say about 90 to 95% are Black African. So the new generation coming forward is really starting to be representative of the country, etc. So I think we're getting over the historic thing. But quite interesting what you're talking about, teaching the maths and science. When I started in the profession, there were bodies like the Institution of Civils that went into the townships to teach people the mathematics, to try and start breaking this whole white monopoly, if you want to put it this way. So it's great to see that again, and I'd love to see some of that come out as community service. I think it would be great, because we're restricting the pool of people coming in if we don't expose them to maths.
I hope the writers made note of that. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so then the whole thing with work identification is if you're not registered, you can only perform under a registered person. That is what is coming. Look, I have mixed feelings about it, but what I have come to realize that professional registration does indicate that a person has the theoretical background and some practical experience. And I think that the whole idea is you'd move it into the state, that the state would also abide by that, and we would use that as professionalization of the state. And obviously, I've known that people moan about people not becoming registered. I know it was a long time ago, but in my day, it was very simple. If you worked in a state department and you became professionally registered, you got a 2-notch salary increase. And I guarantee you, I got registered in the minimum time possible to get that. So desire sets priority. There's ways of addressing the issues. So I just mentioned that. And the implementation will be done during 2025. And the idea is the work identification has been around the 6 stages. I gave you 7 stages because from a client's point of view, you're not interested in construction documentation and management. You're interested in the handover. So I brought an extra one in between closeout and construction for a client's point of view. So that's the work identification. One of the things I do want to point out is if you look at the work identification, and I've taken this from the work identifications, going through the various stages, you will see that procurement is a fundamental part of professional life. And this is where we've had the disconnect in the past by taking procurement as a financial function dealt with by a buyer and a clerk, as to why we've had such poor project outcomes. Moving into the future and having separate regulations for infrastructure, we can start linking and drawing those professionals back in to improve the quality of our procurement documents, our specifications, the oversight, quality, all of those other things. So I think it's a good move to rectify. So I'm just mentioning work identification is a big issue that's coming in. South African national standards. I raise this because you need to understand South African national standards before you can understand OGRIME. Okay? So the Standards Act is a statutory body that allows the development of national standards, and that's the prime national institution for standards. Now, the South African Bureau of Standards works with, I have mentioned, the International Standards Organization. It's probably the most international organization worldwide. It's got 165 countries that work with it, so it's almost everyone. I think the only one is Taiwan is not there because China won't allow them in. Something like, yeah. If SABS belongs to the International Organization for Standardization, if they produce a standard, we can adopt it as a national standard. What I want to say is that national standards, as well as international standards, is based on the principle of consensus. Okay? The consensus principle is understood to be the absence of sustained opposition. So in other words, standards are really, you've got to get consensus amongst people and a compromise as to say this is what it is. Now, the problem is, if you only have one person that has a product, there's no ways you can have consensus because nobody else understands that product. So it needs to be something that is regularly in the market for you to develop it. So SABS does the development, promotion, maintaining. They also promote quality. They do conformity assessments and all of those things. The conformity assessments is if you have a standard, they can do conformity assessments to say that you comply with that standard. So standards can only be in place where there is a mass of people that understand the subject matter, that can get around and agree on a standard. And the process in South Africa is you'd have technical committees that would put it together. When the technical committee is finished with it, it gets published for public comment in the Government Gazette. People then can comment on it, and it is finalized after the receipt of public comment. So it's a very open process. So now the problem is, I now want to come in as with a new product. What do I do? So the process is in this diagram at the bottom here, is during the research and development stage, if you want credibility for your product, because it's not something that everybody else has, you might have a patent right, you might have design protection or whatever it is. So you can go to Agriment South Africa, and Agriment South Africa, I see they've got a logo, they've been going for 50 years. I, in fact, was a member of the Agriment board in the 1990s, so they've been around for years. And the whole idea there is during this cycle of bringing things in, you come with a new technology, you go, and when you're developing it in the market, they have the assessment members of the World Federation of Technical Assessments. That happens worldwide. Agriment is a member of that. It happens in many other countries, the similar type of thing. That body says it's fit for purpose. You can now go to the market with confidence and say it's been certified as fit for purpose. We can now utilize it. When that product becomes something that is commonly understood, it will then migrate into a national standard. So many years ago, we brought out the blocks, the hollow blocks, concrete blocks for building. Up until then, only people had bricks, the solid ones. So you now bring this new innovation onto the market. It's got a different shape, a different size. People say, I don't know what it's about. So it got Agriment certification many years ago. But then as people became familiar with it and was used all over, it's gone into South African national standards. So Agriment is only there while something is under development until it becomes accepted in the market. Does that make sense? So Agriment's, they're talking about fit for purpose in terms of construction-related products, and they also not only look at they not only look at the product itself in use, they look at the manufacturing of it. Can it be manufactured reliably, replicated, all the rest of it? So there's the whole quality management systems that are built into it as well. So Agriment's objectives is to provide assurance to specifiers and users of fitness for purpose of non-standardized construction. They also to support the process of integrated socioeconomic development. And this is important because, you know, a lot of our traditional materials don't comply with the rules put into codes and things like that because they were written somewhere else. And I think this comes into the argument about colonialism and all the rest of it. So even some of our indigenous products can get certified for use in normal construction. So there's that side of it.
Sorry, Professor. You know, in reality, that doesn't really happen. And the perception out there, especially from emerging black contractors and others, is that these regulatory bodies like Agrima, CIDB, and all of these have been created. Obviously, they've been in existence. They've been in existence way before 1994, and that they are just there to be seen as sort of impediments to their getting involved. I mean, I've seen this happening several times in the road construction industry as well. Products would not get certified by SABS and so on. So you're just using white-owned companies. They are supplying, and they've been supplying before democracy and now and so on. But let's look at a solution. You know, as I sit here and I listen to this chair, is chair here? Yeah. As I listen to this, I feel that there is a need for us to take this out to our society. And what I would like to have, I don't know if it's been done before, but is to have an annual convention. We run an annual convention. We make it part of the KPIs and part of our whole requirement of the department. And we set a team to have a convention where we invite all the contractors, emerging contractors, all of that. And I can tell you, it will not even cost us a cent, because we'll have an exhibition on the side. Imagine we're having it at Sandton Convention Center or ICC Durban or something like that. We'll have a exhibition on the side where Agrima, SA, CIDB, SABS, all of them will take stalls there, stands. And they would be able to present their case and how to use these. I feel like we need to transform the perception of these organizations in the minds of aspirant contractors that want to do business with government and all of that. So what we do is, and you take the Engineering South Africa, all of them, they have affiliates who are established in business. They would be very keen on getting involved in something like this, becoming part of such a convention. And then we invite all the contractors, invite your construction mafia people that you call construction mafia, invite them to come in and let's engage them. Let's allow a platform where they can come and air their views about their perception, how they see these institutions, and what can be done to remove those bottlenecks and so on.
Yeah, no, that can be done. But just two things I want to say about Agriment, just so that we understand it, is with the green products coming in, we're going to have to fundamentally change our construction methodologies, and Agriment board has something to offer. The one thing I do want to say to you that's the downside of Agriment to an extent is you getting a certificate holder that now owns the certificate and owns the innovation that is there. And that I can understand to be a frustration, because others have to come to the certificate holder to use it. But what I do want to point out to you from years back, there was the BISA, that's the bitumen emulsion bricks, that was put together, that Agriment created an open certificate. In other words, it wasn't held by an individual. Anybody could utilize it. And I heard, I didn't know that the previous CEO of the board had passed away, Joe, and I knew him very well. But with the new crowd coming in, I don't know them, but I think maybe the time has come to resurrect some more of these open certificates and get Agriment to do it, because wherever I go, I hear the developers moaning, yes, it takes so much time, it takes so much money to get it through. But the fact is, it's linked to building regulations. If you don't have it, you can't comply with building regulations and things like that. But if you do have the open certificate, and we could encourage more of that with the green building, I think we would have a better contribution to society and alleviate some of those issues. So I'm just mentioning that to you.
The convention, idea of a convention, call it whatever you want to call it, it will be a means for us to open up these institutions and make them almost accessible to people that see them in a particular way.
I agree.
And we should be
it's
the
a two-way
vehicle to do
process,
it.
because
Yeah.
then they're getting feedback on how they perceive.
Correct.
And they can make inroads. So I think it's a good suggestion.
Members on the right, please note. Thank you.
I'll just touch upon the CIDB. I'm not going to go into too much, but just to sort of give some of the high level things that which I believe are key. The Construction Industry Development Board was established to implement an integrated strategy for the reconstruction, growth, and development of the construction industry. So their prime reason for existence was to develop the industry, okay, in all its aspects. The registers, the Act creates a register of contractors linked to a best practice recognition scheme and a register of projects linked to a best practice project scheme. And both of these registers are required to implement the integrated strategy. I think where a lot of the frustration has come in is it's been so many years since the establishment of the register of contractors and the register of projects to the best practice assessment schemes. I think that is where the problems have arisen. But conceptually, that was the way in which it was put together, to use those registers to drive development. So in other words, you could get a track record, you could get star ratings or whatever. I'm talking about what was thought about in the beginning, and it's just in trying to get it implemented. I think it's almost like some of our property trading and things like this. It's just getting the teething problem sorted out. But be that as it may, the idea of it is the construction industry is there, and what they've also done is, remember, they operate not just for construction works. This is one of the difficulties, is people see construction industry is construction contracts. But remember, they have a mandate for suppliers, professional service providers, manufacturers, as well as contractors. They could replicate the register if it's justifiable. So in other words, it's not just a case you have to now go and get the act changed to put in place a register of consultants and things like that. They have the mandate in the legislation. It just needs to be sorted out why you need it. And remember, I just brought in here as well the work identification from CBE deals with the whole built environment, which is exactly what CIDB does. So CIDB looks at it from a company's point of view, CBE looks at it from an individual's point of view, but they're both operating across the built environment, if you're with me. So that's their remit. Now, the procurement and delivery management aspects of the CIDB Act, they have the powers to declare best practices. So like we were talking about, like GIAMA hasn't necessarily published guidelines or anything else like that. If you didn't want to do it through the GIAMA Act, which only applies to a portion of government, the CIDB Act applies across the whole of government in the construction sector. There's nothing to stop them putting a best practice out for asset management, for example, delivery management, procurement, all of these kind of things. What has happened in the past is some of the procurement standards that were put out by the CIDB have actually landed up as international standards and have back in South African national standards. So there's been stuff that has come out over the years. So they have a mandate to do best practice. They've linked some of the definitions they've given are linked to specific parts of their act. And as I said to you, they can, to promote best practice, the board may maintain a register of suppliers, manufacturers, or service providers in the construction industry. So they have wide powers. They've only exercised narrow powers to date. Okay? Just wanted to make that point.
In there, can I just ask, so what's then the benefit of having, it looks to me like a duplication of efforts if we're going to have professionals registered on the CBE and again on the CIDB. What will then be the value of me as a professional being registered on both? Is there value
No, but
there?
you see, what should happen is, if you read this, is maintain a register of suppliers, manufacturers, or service providers. That is companies.
Okay,
Whereas CBE is individuals.
for
They
individuals.
have no mandate currently to register companies. So think of it companies and think of it as individuals. But the two should talk to each other because it's the same industry you're regulating.
So then, wouldn't CBE then be best placed to also be the one that registers companies as well as individuals?
Well,
And-
that's a political decision.
Okay.
The current political decision is the mandate is with the CIDB. If that needs to change, then it's up to Parliament to make
whole
the
act.
changes. But at the moment, it's very clear that CIDB is there to put it in place. Okay?
Just a note, I think through the engagements with the current Minister of Public Works and Infrastructure, he did actually make mention of the fact that with the upcoming Public Works Bill, he would like to ensure that the CIDB and CBE are merged together to make one entity. But now, currently, there's two different regulations that are regulating both these entities separately. So we're not sure if it does happen. Perhaps we could see what you're proposing coming to fruition in the near future, but we don't know. As we're saying, as Prof is saying also that if then the CBE and the CIDB should merge, then the legislation that is regulating these entities should actually change. Thank you.
But in a sense, it's not a bad idea because you're basically looking at the same industry. And in fact, CBE is just an umbrella body setting policy. It's not taking away anything from the statutory councils that are functioning. It's just bringing it into the fold. And maybe there is merit in better coordination, so I can understand the merits of that. What the CIDB Act does do, and I'm going to just cut it quite short because you can read it up, but just to highlight what it is they can put in place a register of contractors. Now, the idea of the register of contractors was to grade contractors in terms of their capabilities. Now, if you think about a contractor, and I'm not here to defend or promote the CIDB, but I do believe the principles of grading are correct, because what you've got to look at is financial capacity, because a contractor has to carry the costs of construction in the setting up and is usually paid a month in arrears. So what is the proxy measurement for that? Is what is your annual turnover. There's a relationship between turnover, which is a proxy measure for what your credit ratings are, for all those kind of things rolled up. What is your work experience, and what leverage can you muscle in terms of getting guarantees from other companies and things like that. So to me, it's a system that is set at a minimum level. It's not like you can't do a 2 million rand job if you haven't done a 2 million rand job before. It's not the chicken or the egg. It's sort of typically something like the turnover is 2/3 of the value of the job that you're doing. So there's stretch in it, but there is a linkage between the two. So that's the categorization in terms of the various gradings. And the idea was that was going to be linked to a best practice assessment scheme that then you could start grading further on your contractors. And that seems to have got stuck with all sorts of things because, and look, I understand some of that. I mean, the debates have been going on for years because do you get the consultant who's running the job to rate the contractor? Well, you mess me around, I'll mark you down. I mean, it's all of those kind of issues that are real issues to get resolved. So I understand some of the frustration. And you're not allowed to do construction works unless you're registered with the construction industry in the public sector. Now, what has happened, we also have a register of projects. The idea is to understand the size, nature of projects, and at the same time to link it to a best practice assessment scheme. And so what they've now brought in is their build program, where you've got the skills development that takes place that is linked to accreditation processes and things like that. And you've also got the contractor indirect targeting, which you would have a 5% goal to an emerging contractor, and you would link it to mentorship as well to improve their performance. So those are what the CIDB is all about at the moment. So they can issue best practice, they've got the registers, they've got that. And I think that as we move into the future with the procurement bill, at least the Public Procurement Act, one of the big frustrations in my mind is that Treasury has just ignored what the CIDB's got. Like the CIDB has the iTender system that you advertise your tenders on, but you still have to advertise them on the central supplier database. The two don't talk to each other. There's no categorization. There's no cross-pollination between them. And I think in moving forward with the opportunity of having separate regulations for infrastructure, we need to address that. We either have one place you do it, but not both places. So let me end there. I promised you that we would finish at
Sorry.
4 o'clock.
Rod, just one issue, please, if I may. It's slide 100. You haven't gone there.
Oh, sorry, I was going to, I'm just trimming a little bit to keep the time.
Slide 100.
Okay.
Yes. Now, you know, as members of this committee, we have a social outcome that we want to achieve through all these bodies, right? Now, if you look at the registration regulation 11.2, it gives you A, B, and C. Is it possible for us to include a D, where we say a company that has designation 7, in order to qualify to go to designation 8, you would have had to have developed a minimum of 2 or 3 companies and brought them up to level 6. I wanted to merge the two, merge it with the contractor grading. I'll tell you why. Is it in already?
No, it's not. But that's the kind of thing you can bring in.
So can we please make a note, members on the right? I'm not writing down, but yeah, let's introduce an item D. Yeah.
You want social responsibility, stewardship, all of those kind of things, which is the normal things you call to governance.
Yes.
Because if you think of the grading of contractors, in my mind, rough cut, 1 and 2 are startup resources partners.
Correct.
6 and upwards is a company structure. 6 is still in between, but 7 is a company structure. So what you're saying is, in growing up as a company structure, we want you to embrace sustainability principles of not only the environmental content, as well as the social.
Do you know what that's going to do? It's going to force these companies to start to identify smaller companies, your 5 and 6 and so on, and to develop them. Because if they don't, they're not going to get that grading to go to the next level.
I can tell you with the scorecard, if I go for 7, 8, and 9, it is very rare that I don't award to a level 1 or level 2. Everybody's got the same ability, but it is not translated into practice. So what you're saying is perhaps there is a different way of getting it, and to build this in, and companies will respond to that. And it's a different point. So, exhausted you over the 1.5 days of it. I know it's been intensive, but I hope you put something out of it. Very good.
Yeah. Can I ask a final question? Why is this aspect only finance-based and not competence-based?
You see, the problem about competence-based, how do you measure it? The finance-based is the way I look at it, because when we first came out, there was also professional registrations linked to it. But now a lot of companies have to then keep the professional registrations going, and they don't really need it. So it's how do you assess? To me, it's about your track record of prior performance. So if you're looking over your turnover over the last 5 years, If you've been in business and you've got a business that's continuing, you haven't gone bust because you're delivering okay, if you're with me. So it's really around a financial thing because it's a proxy measurement of a whole host of other things. Remember the problem as well with the CIDB, you're looking at a snapshot in time. You're giving for a 3-year period a grading. You're not going to downgrade during that period. You can upgrade during that period. So you've got to make a decision on information that's available. And, you know, over years, I've tested what the CIDB's done, and it's the right sort of ballpark, roughly. You still have to do your due diligence to do the things you're looking at, the actual competence to do the job. That's part of your procurement. One of the mistakes made with the CIDB, or say the unintended consequences, the bean counters or the buyers in the various departments say, that guy's good to go because he's got the right CIDB grading. They never checked all the other things, what his work commitments are at the time, does he have the necessary skills. So it's always been envisaged that that was a first line rough cut. From there onwards, you needed to do your due diligence. So the unintended consequence, and this is the same thing with the register of consultants that I've told CIDB, what happens then, people say that person is qualified. Now, how do you sort out the qualifications of all the ranges of specializations and things like that? He happens to have a civil engineering degree. Can he now design structures? See the problems? It's a whole myriad of things. So you had to come down to what the fundamentals were as a rough cut guide, and you need to refine it as you go along. Wits is happy to engage with you at any other stage if you need specific things. If it's outside my expertise, I'll bring colleagues along, and certainly we're here to support the process of whatever your decision making is. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Oh, we no longer have a facilitator now. Yeah. Okay. Good afternoon, colleagues. It's my first time officially today to greet you. Maybe we should request Nola to make some few announcements before we could officially make a closing.
All right, thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson. Just a few announcements from my side. The presentations from all the NSG presenters and facilitators have now been uploaded online. So members would have to use their login details, go into the e-learning platform of the National School of Government, and then access all those presentations over there. Prof. Watermeyer's presentation was also shared with the members yesterday via WhatsApp, and I think we also emailed it. The next one, Honorable Chair, is that the National School of Government will be holding a feedback session as part of their follow-up after the actual workshop has been done. So we shall then from our office communicate thoroughly when a date has been identified where that will be done. That is most likely to take place in Cape Town, a full day session that will be. So because the NSG has indicated that they're willing to come through to us free of charge, because it's part of their follow-ups after their workshops. Members would also note that the previous program before the one that was sent yesterday, that would have changed, had a segment where Professor Somadoda Fikeni, who's in the Public Service Commission, was supposed to facilitate a piece on the parliamentary oversight model, as well as the public participation model of Parliament. Those two are very key documents that honorable members would be really encouraged to engage. We'll be sending through those documents immediately, but we've then proposed to the NSG that they could as well, during that one-day session, they may as well just bring Professor Fikeni to also deal with that segment that he could not get. Unfortunately, couldn't make it because it turned out that he had a clash in his program. The PSC is currently having its strat planning session in Pretoria simultaneously with this course. Lastly, Honorable Chair, I think I'm done. Oh, lastly, Honorable Chairperson, tomorrow we encourage members to be ready to depart the hotel at 7:30 because the program should be starting in the head office of the DPWI exactly at 8 o'clock. We've got a very long program tomorrow, so we would need to start on time. Thank you, Chair.
No, I thought you were going to highlight that we're starting with the normal portfolio committee meeting.
Apologies, Chair, for that omission. So tomorrow's program will start as a normal portfolio committee meeting. First and foremost, we're going to have the Auditor General that'll be presenting on its findings, finding on the performance of the department 2023-24. After the AG, then the department will get into the bigger detail of the financial and non-financial performance. Thereafter, the department will also give us another presentation on the Telkom Towers and Salvacorp projects before we then go on site to see those sites based on the briefings they would have given to us. After lunch, Honorable Chair, the delegation then will proceed from the site visits to the IDT, which will be the first entity that the committee will visit. All the other entities will be done on a Friday. Friday's program is also just as lengthy because we'll start as early as, I think it's 8 o'clock as well, proceeding through from Pretoria, proceeding through to the CIDB in Centurion, and lastly end off with the Infrastructure South Africa entity that is based in Sandton. The delegation will therefore check out of the hotel on Friday morning because we'll be traveling throughout the day and end off in the evening in Sandton at ISA. So we'll sleep over in Sandton, then travel back to our respective provinces on Saturday. Thank you, Honorable Chair.
Thank you. Oh, there's a question, Honorable Bath, but I want to make a suggestion, Honorable members. It will be good, but subject to your approval. We work as a collective, as I always say. It will be good if the department don't give us a report on Telkom Towers, but we go and do our own oversight so that our mind is clear. We do our own oversight. Then later, we'll call the department in a formal portfolio committee, then we engage, taking from there. I just wanted to make changes on that part only, honorable members. They must allow us to do they must not brainwash us. We must go there being raw. We'll do our own observation. And I believe every member here, the story have been all over the media. You do your own research individually. We don't want, I suggest we don't have to take a presentation tomorrow. The only thing that will be official on our site is the annual report that will be presented because it must be done. Then we deliberate on it as normal. Then later, allow us to move to an oversight and do our oversight. In the oversight, members, we are allowed to engage. They will be part of us. We'll drop question, we'll question there and there, but the official part, we'll call them to a study group. That is my request to yourself, members, subject to your approval. Then, Bath, you can come in.
Thank you, Chair. I support your recommendation to skip the presentation so that we can go in with a clear mind. My question is actually related to that, and my question was going to be, for those of us that are new, and this is our first time doing oversight, how can we as a committee best prepare for these 2 oversight visits that we're going to do? I know that our support staff have given us 2 very good reports. Is it those that we should study and look at so that we come with questions in mind? I did note that in those reports, access was not granted in certain cases in the Telkom Towers before. So I think it would be good maybe to prompt everyone to just go through those. But yeah, just as a first timer, how can we best prepare for the oversight? The second question that I had or yeah, the request that I had was obviously looking at Friday's agenda. What was going to happen on Saturday is now being squeezed into Friday, so it's a very, very long agenda. I don't know if there's any way to shorten it a bit so that we don't end so late. I think we're ending at like 9 p.m. It's okay if that's how we're going to do it. It's fine. I just don't know if there's a way to make it more efficient. And then the last point that I have, it's a point of clarity. Now, I don't need to answer now, but the certificates that have just been emailed to us, thank you, Nola, I just want to be clear, are those certificates of attendance or are those certificates of having completed the module? Because I'll be honest, for myself, I haven't read through all the content that was shared by the NSG. So I just want to know what the certificate is for exactly. Thank you.
Honorable Raj and
I think
Mangos,
Honorable
you
Bart's certificate must be revoked and removed because we diligently read all the notes. I'm joking. I'm joking.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson, and greetings to my colleagues. Chair, I think what you have proposed is supported by us. The report, we got it from NOLA with regards to telecom towers. We can read it on our own. Then when we go there, at least you know what is it that you must look at. Then after that, the department must come and present. At least it will be much easier for us to engage because we will be there and seeing what is it that is happening. I think that one is a good decision to take. We support it, Honorable Chairperson. Thank you.
thank you, members. Knowles, do you want to respond to some of the questions that were posed? Clarity, but Honorable Bath, I believe these 2 days, be it the third day today, most of the issues that were touched yesterday, it's about how must we do our own oversight. The reason why I'm tempted not to agree for them to present what they're gonna present, we can't call them again and say, come and repeat what you have presented. We want to engage the report when we have made our own oversight, our own observation of what is on the ground. Remember, honorable members, you've got a legacy report. All these things are emanating from a legacy report that we have agreed, we adopted it. Therefore, that's why I'm saying we are very much independent in thinking and we are allowed to do our own analysis. So for tomorrow, it's good. You have your own questions. You can draft your own questions. Therefore, versus what you're gonna see and observe. The two departments, we have invited them. We hope they'll honor the invite because it's not DPWI only, it's also with subs. And on the basis of subs as well, I'm not sure whether support staff, you have also invited the implementing agency, which is your DBSA, but it's fine. For tomorrow, it's not their interrogation, it's our work. We must go and do our own oversight. That's why I'm saying we'll have a special day where we'll call all of them, the role players, and we hear, then we'll take a decision. But for tomorrow, you will be allowed to question where you want to understand so that we prepare ourselves when we'll be adopting the program or the oversight visit report. Remember, we're still going to have a report that must be tabled in the plenary. And when we adopt that, then it will assist you. Maybe Shraip, do you want to assist in responding some of the clarity, Inez, Nola?
Chair, I'm fine. I think you covered it. Thank you.
It's fine on my side as well. I think what Honorable Barth meant was just the two research documents that just provides the committee with information in terms of where the previous sixth parliament left off in terms of oversight on the Telkom towers, and its reports that were received from both the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure and the South African Police Service for additional clarity issues that emanated from the 2022 oversight. So that would just assist. It would, yeah. Thanks, Chairperson.
Thank you, Chairperson. The Chair has largely covered us regarding the preparation for the oversight visit. If honorable members may be reminded, we did actually indicate that when the committee adopted the second and third quarter program of this year, we actually indicated strictly that all the items that you see on the agenda for this year up till December are basically priority areas that were highlighted on the legacy report. Therefore, this means members are encouraged to use the legacy report as their Bible until whenever, because most of the information that you would need that would be a handover from the Sixth Parliament is all in the legacy report, including the recommendations of oversight visits and study tours and meetings as well. Regarding additional to that, the research papers, Honorable Bath, will also be a very good base point to refer to when you're preparing for tomorrow's oversight visit. Regarding the Friday program, it's unfortunately, unless then we manage time even better or more effectively, but as it stands, it really looks impossible to shorten the program even further, unless then, as I'm saying, then time can be better managed. The certificates are certificate of completion of the modules. So you would need to then go back to your e-learning program and check all your materials that are in there. The materials remain there, honorable members. They will not be removed because you have completed the program. So as Ms. Mkwana said yesterday, that you'll keep, whenever you feel like there's something that you need to understand or rather any clarity, you are allowed to always go back online on the e-learning platform of the NSG to refer to those documents. Thank you, Honorable Chair.
Thank you, members. The last part that I want to clarify, Honorable Bath, is that we got a request. Seated here, we are only 10 members, be it 11 if I've counted correctly. There are family bereavement amongst ourselves. So members are requested to be part until Friday. They can bear the pressure and work until 9 o'clock. Then after 9, they will depart and go back. We've got 3 or 4, if I'm not mistaken, members who have got bereavement. And some, it's very close, some are family members, some are friends. So we had to consider that, unlike for us to have continue with a program being 3 or 4. Therefore, that's the reason why we're trying to shrink the program. Honorable members, let me take this opportunity and officially close the capacity building session, as we said, starting from Monday until today. It was our capacity building, and I want to take this opportunity to say to you, we are unlike the executives. If a new person comes in, changes everything. At ours, we must say bravo to ourselves. We understand it's not about us, it's about service delivery. We do. This capacity building and the oversight, it emanates from the legacy report. As I've said, we have adopted the legacy report from day 1, and they recommended for us to have a capacity building, and it was very much fruitful. We want to take this opportunity and appreciate those who came before us, the 6th Parliament Committee that has advised us to start early in planning. And in our planning, we wanted to cover the ethical issues related to oversight, to the executives. We want to take this opportunity and appreciate the National School of Government for doing its excellent training session from Monday till yesterday midday. And we also want to appreciate Wits School of Construction, Economics and Management, yourself, Dr. Watamia, that you did an excellent job of taking us through the infrastructure part of public works. Of course, it's about that. And you were very much spot on, even though we're in and out. We got your document. Some of us went through them last night, immediately when you gave us. We even want to go further to say you have covered project management that we believe and now understand the delivery cycle, challenges with the immovable assets register. That is a thorny issue. We've been always asking the department about the immovable register. Now we know how are we going to question them. And the focus area of the CIDB, CB, IDT, and other implementing agencies. What we all appreciate is that you have covered the work of this committee from the point of procurement. We now understand how things are procured, even though we had some few ideas, but now I think it has drilled down. You even assisted by highlighting that we needed to base decision on knowledge, not on emotions, because our oversight over the ministry or the executive and the administration is to strengthen that knowledge through our oversight. That's why we're even redirecting the program for them not to give us a report prior. We want to get the sense from the ground of ourselves. We want to officially thank you as the School of Construction, Economic and Management, and also the NSG for sharing this excellence with us. You have made us stronger. The time that you spend is not in vain, as even we are agreeing, and Nola says, you are available if we are hitting the rock. We want to understand further or have clarities, and it has sharpened ourselves as you have empowered us to do our oversight as Public Works and Infrastructure Committee. With these few words, honorable members, I want to say thank you even from your side for taking and being committed. As you even said, most of you've got your bereavement, which is family is more important, but you prioritized your work. And I see all of us, we see how passionate you are about the ethics, transformation, and repairing what is wrong. There's a lot that is wrong. I've noticed or I've realized, and I believe through your engagement, you are realizing there's a lot that is wrong. And we are stronger than what we were before when we started on Monday. And where we forget or stumble, as we have made a request, we hope you'll take our call and assist again. I'm directing it to you, Dr. Watamia, because the the School of Government has already made that calling to us to say they are just a phone call away. They'll even come to Cape Town to do further trainings. So we are making that call to yourself as well. Avail yourself. We've went through your CV. We understand even those bodies, entities that are responsible for construction, you once led, meaning you have the understanding of what is happening in the economy of construction and you understand it better. So allow us, you become our moving archives. And I want to say to all members, this was a training session. We have learned, we have absorbed the water. As we said when we started, we are a sponge. We are going to absorb the water that is going to be poured on the sponge. This was not a portfolio meeting. but it has assisted us. We were all learners the whole week. But today, as we end, now we are the legislation. We are going to do our work. Missiles that we are given to do oversight, we're going to utilize them. We must be humble and learn as MPs and support staff. We want to appreciate you. You have made it possible for us to arrive here. It might not have been easy, but I understand it was not easy. Some, they even questioned us when we showed them a program. How did you arrive and get these people? Because we know you are busy, Dr. Watermeyer. You were even questioned when someone saw our program. We want to appreciate. We had different presenters from Monday. We want to really say through support staff, write letters to appreciate and encourage them. Your doors must always be opened. As we must respect one another as members and work as a collective. And collectiveness makes us to be more talented and knowledge to do our oversight over the executive. And for the next 5 years, 5 years is too much. But if we work collectively, for us it will be just a short time. We have started and we believe we are starting in the right foot. One of our commitment is that we are not going to leave no stones unturned. As we're starting with Telkom Towers, our next step, Nola, you write to the chair of chairs. It will be the George incident. That personally I did not want to disturb when Dr. Watermeyer was busy presenting. There's a lot that we picked up and how we must deal with the matter of George. Life have been lost there. We are not just going to fold our arms and say it's not us, it's not our families. We are leaders of South Africa and we have interest on what is happening with anyone, be it's a foreign nationals, but it's within the country. That's our responsibility. But lastly, what I want to put and say, outside, I'll consult, or individually, we must also talk to Dr. Watermeyer. The injustice of imbalances in the construction industry. He has highlighted principles, but deeply, I think we need to engage further if we need to bring a legislation that addresses the imbalances, in particular with what even Honorable Reddy was busy trying to ask, with only few big companies that are doing well in the construction industry. How best can we bring a legislation that will try and address that? But with these few words, honorable members, let me officially end the session of capacity building and say we are more stronger, more capable. I know most of us or some of us, it's not our first term or our first time as members. We've been members of parliament, but this type of a training or a capacity building we never had. And we want to take this opportunity and applaud our support staff. We are well equipped. It looks like maybe some few years that we started in parliament, we never learned. But Bath, be part of us. We were learners and we are well equipped. I want to say thank you, and we are officially closing the session of capacity building. Let's meet tomorrow. Be punctual. You were taught about time management. We're going to do that. Thank you.